Janine, it's recording.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our webinar series with Dr. Mary Murphy. Given the heartbreaking news of this week in Wilton and the loss of 2 beloved members of our community, just one a young student at Wilton High School, we decided along with Dr. Murphy that it would be appropriate to include managing grief as a topic in this webinar. So our format today will be a little less formal. You can be asking questions in the Q&A during Dr. Murphy's presentation, and she'll be answering them as we go along. So it'll be a little bit more like a conversation, but just please use the Q&A button as opposed to the chat because we can't keep track of the questions in the chat. So this morning, Dr. Murphy will address coping with uncertainty and loss and how we can help our children and ourselves as we struggle through these losses during an already stressful and uncertain time in COVID learning. And our hearts are with the Duraco and Jimenez families at this time. Dr. Murphy is a licensed clinical psychologist with a private practice that focuses on helping children and adolescents affected by mood disorders, neurological conditions, including those that impact learning, and substance abuse. For more information on Dr. Murphy, you can visit our website at www.spednetwilton.org or on our Facebook page. And this event is being co-sponsored by our partners, Wilton Youth Council and Weston Youth Services. I'll post all of our websites in the chat so that you can access them later. And all of the information from today's webinar, including Dr. Murphy's PowerPoint, will be uploaded to the SpedNet Wilton website and Facebook page. Our moderators today are Eve Kessler, founder of SpedNet Wilton, co-president of SpedNet Wilton, Carolina Corrigan, and I'm Janine Kelly. Just a couple quick ground rules. Again, please ask questions during the presentation, but please use the Q&A button. We can't monitor the questions through the chat. And we'll also do our best to answer them in the order that they're received. Please be mindful that this is an open forum and it's being recorded, so we can't guarantee confidentiality. Just be mindful not to include any private information that you don't want out in the public sector. Also, any information provided in this webinar by Dr. Murphy or the moderators is not intended to be legal or therapeutic advice. The information, content, and materials presented today are for your information only. Again, I will post all of the websites from SpedNet Wilton, Wilton Youth Services, and Weston Youth Services, Weston Youth Council, Wilton Youth Council and Weston Youth Services on the chat button at the end. And with that, I will turn you over to Dr. Murphy.
Thank you, Janine. Janine, Eve, and Lena, I just wanted to say thank you. I always am so happy to speak for SpedNet, and this is definitely a very humbling experience to be asked to talk about something that is so difficult, I think, for everybody to be trying to wrap their heads and their hearts around this this particular week. And so this is definitely a different kind of format, and that's why we wanted the moderators to point out that we really do want back and forth, kind of feel like it's a forum to discuss and bring out concerns that can be addressed kind of as we move through the presentation. I was kind of joking about how I'm usually such a, like an academic presenter, and I really, that feels completely wrong for the circumstances. And so I want us to be able to speak and have information that would be comforting and educational, but also speaking directly to the concerns that people have in the moment, at this moment. So I am going to ask Lena specifically to interrupt me, which I have never done, and I just would like her to do, so that we can go through having things addressed as the specific audience that's here really needs feedback about. So we would like to support you in any way that we can, and that's how we think we could do it best today. So just so you know, the first talk that we did, was it only a couple of weeks? No, 4 weeks ago? I forget. It seems like it was like so long ago. We expected that we were going to do this follow-up no matter what, to talk about, you know, okay, now we're in, and it's been a couple weeks, a few weeks under our belt. What now are we kind of dealing with? And so I'm just going to say what we're going to talk about it as like kind of like a, what have we learned from the community of parents and kids? What are they saying since the start of school now? Also, what can we find out about what the research tells us about the adjustment to school in times of recent trauma and loss? And then the majority is, how can parents support themselves and their children? And I want to be able to point out specific things, and if they're tailored to situations, we could try to do that as well. And then what's that dividing line where we want to ask professionals to come in and help? And so where that line might be. Some of the summary, I've been working virtually throughout all of COVID, and I've seen the end of last school year, now returning back. Many of the kids in different districts are either in person fully. I have the whole spectrum. So I'm seeing what kids are saying about what it's been like to adjust going back to school, from people who are full force thrown in the deep end, fully in person, full time, and then hybrid. And no matter what, like across the board, this is what kids are saying. They're saying things like, you know, the way everything looks is, it feels like everything's been canceled. You know, like activities, interaction, allowable interactions between their friends. That's a very big one. I kind of expected that, you know, kids were going to be relieved. They finally get to see their friends again. And then I have sessions with them and they look demoralized and sad. And I'm like, oh, I thought you were looking forward to this. What happened? And they're like, I'm not even allowed to talk to them. I can't talk to my friends, you know, interact with them. And it doesn't make sense because, you know, after school, we'll walk to the Dunkin' Donuts and hang out there together. But during school, we have these separate rules and things look so different. And it's hard for them to manage these different realities. There's the managing of their parents' advice about how to interact and how much to social distance, the different message they may get at school. And throughout a whole day, they can get conflicting messages all day long. And it really doesn't make sense to them. They're confused by it.
So Mary, that's kind of, I just got sorry, interrupting, but it's a question who's actually just touching on it's, any advice for teens dealing with anxiety during these uncertain times, specifically since isolating for so long, anxiety about safety, being out in public and meeting people?
So the beginning of it is somebody who already has anxiety?
I think any advice for teens dealing with anxiety. So yes, probably having just anxiety about, you know, today's world, it seems like.
Yeah. So I always try to talk to kids about the difference between possible and probable when they're trying to kind of calculate what is something they should be worried about. You know, is this something that we should worry about or not? And it's not easy to kind of approach things that way, but sometimes kids really do get it when you say, okay, is there a possibility there could be transmission of COVID? Absolutely. Like, how probable is it if I'm doing all of the things that I'm supposed to, that I'm going to get sick? No, not probable. There's a big difference for someone who's experiencing anxiety to notice that distinction. There's the realm of possibility that of course something could happen, but how likely is it that something would happen? So if you're doing all the precautions, you are in a safer range, right? And so I'm always encouraging people to find, and they're finding really creative ways to do things. And, you know, speaking of this, you know, they say they can't interact with, you know, normally at school, but that's only the certain hours of the day. I ask that they try to specifically plan for something that they can do and look forward to after school, whether it's joining a virtual club together or, you know, being able to social distance, hang out still with the weather, they still can be doing this stuff outside in the yard. And that satisfies most degrees because there's a big range of parents' concerns about how close they want their kids to be to friends. And so while we still have outdoors available to us, I'm still, you know, trying to kind of recommend to them, get your socialization in this way. you know, having some contact with a few select people. Everybody by now is kind of potted up, right? Like there's certain friends only that we're kind of okay and our parents are okay with, and we stick with that. We reduce our risks by doing that. And having regular social interaction is what helps keep all of anxiety down. But just making sure that it's the distinction is made that it's not probable that something bad will happen if they're doing all of the reasonable precautions they're asked to do. So, and then I think that anxiety is something we're going to talk about a little bit later too, that is going to address this in a slightly different direction. And then the other kind of sentiment that they're expressing is that they feel like this is never going to end. You know, the scope and the life experience of young people is very different. We know the long game, you know, we're in our 30s and 40s and 50s. And, you know, as parents, we know, and we can look back on periods of time and say, wow, that was a hard time. This is their first, right? This is the first loss experience that many kids have ever had. This is the first, and I use that term very broadly because they're losing and grieving everyday life. And they're also grieving now a specific person or persons. So, and but generally, I think they're grieving the loss of, you know, what normal life was. And so it can feel like it's never ending. And I think that it's important for us to give explicit messages that this is a temporary situation. This is something that's going to be, that will lessen the pain and the constant adjustments to how we're feeling and how the world looks is going to change over time. So this sentiment is being expressed by kids, and the majority of parents and what they've been giving us as feedback is that they're truly just overwhelmed. They feel like they can't be a teacher and a parent and an employee all at the same time. They can't clone themselves, right? And they can't feel like they can do any one of these well because they're split over all these responsibilities. That's the sentiment that people are expressing. And they're really, you know, especially thinking about our audience, many, if not most of our kids have special needs and 504s and IEPs, and we're worried that our kids are not getting the education that they need in this format that we're living in right now. And so they also, you know, it's not meant to be a joke, but it's true. They also feel like it's never going to end. So we have the kids kind of feeling demoralized and the parents feeling demoralized at the same time. And I don't know if this ever gets expressed into the public as much as it should, but one of the things that's a hallmark of depression and something to be kind of mindful of, to be aware and make sure that we're not kind of getting stuck in these negative sentiments. One of the hallmarks of depression is to feel like something will never end, that they don't see a positive future. And so these sentiments are something that we have to be really vigilant about, making sure that kids don't feel like kids and parents, feel like things are terrible. They're going to be like this forever, and there's no getting out of this. That is bordering on feeling like there's no hope, and that's a hallmark of depression. So we want to be very careful about making sure that people are not, you know, that people are moving through these feelings and adjusting to these things and not getting stuck in the mire of that. So when we're looking for whether we might need support for ourselves as parents, or we're wondering if our kids are struggling too much, maybe, you know, more so than the other kids or your other kids or the kids at school, that's a dividing line, is to consider, are they getting stuck in these feelings of feeling like it will last forever? So that's not just a sentiment, but also a recommendation, is to look out for the words that people are using. They are red flags for whether somebody might need more help. And I just wanted to go back to explaining in our first presentation, this is still our point of reference, that we had this article that came out now over a month ago. And at the time, we wanted to point out that COVID is all about trying to help them cope with those sentiments, not feel like it's going to be forever, but coaching them through this disappointing season that we're having. And what we realize, what's really important is that we want to emphasize and impart hope. And when horrible things happen, I think, or unexpected things happen, our message to kids absolutely has to be, and reminders to ourselves has to be, that what we're going through is a temporary season. And although things have been profoundly changed, things will not be forever this way. And that people do move through their feelings and do come out the other side. And it's especially hard for kids to grasp that message. And so it's even more important for us to be the stewards of this message. And in this kind of time, maybe even a little bit of fake it till you make it. And for the parents, because the parents may not really believe this. So what I wanted to say is that, we were preparing this talk, this series. We've been preparing for doing a talk for the teachers that's on parallel with this same presentation. We've been preparing for what we thought were going to be the tragedy and the losses our community would be experiencing. We thought we knew what might be coming. And instead, unexpected new losses have actually come up. And so it's kind of like, we had our eye over here and then got sideswiped over here, And I think that's a sentiment that people are probably feeling right now. And so the loss is really striking. And it's also very interesting that, at the end of our last talk, one of our questions from the audience was, what should we do? And how do we react to the kids and help support the kids if somebody dies from COVID? And it's expected, we've had 200,000 deaths, right? It's expected possibly that they will be touched by this, that someone will have an uncle or a friend or somebody around them they might know of, hopefully not too close to them, but somebody in their life they will be coping with the loss of because of COVID, we thought. And although, as far as we know, that has not happened directly in our community, we were preparing for, how do we help support kids and understand kind of what are the comforting messages? What could we do to help in an unimaginable time? And it turned out to be something very different that is a loss, but for completely different reasons. And so I think it's unexpected. And I think, even in our first series, we were talking about how to cope with unexpected life events. And that's why, all the more I think that our feedback and, the advice that we have is really has to be kind of applied in this situation too. And so what I was trying to point out last time is still true, that we don't have a roadmap for what it's like for communities to reestablish and come together and return to school under these circumstances where there's COVID and there's now losses that the community has suffered. But we do know from the past that there's been really unimaginable events that have happened. And the important key thing is that we know that lots of events, horrible events, have happened where there was no warning or possibility to prepare. And that's exactly what loss is. A death is the exact same thing. So it's something that was unprepared, unexpected, unimaginable. And what we know is that in reaction to having a loss like this, there are some things that we could expect to happen for not the majority of people, but everyone will be going through some adjustment. But some kids are now going to be more likely to experience anxiety and some different behavioral issues. What we talked about last time is that if we focus on people's social emotional needs, we're going to be able to help support them. And so I want to tell you a few kind of things to focus on. We talked about these two things, so I'll move on from that quickly. Last time we talked about trying to focus on what we can control. Everything around us feels like it's out of our control right now. And focusing on self-care. But kind of how do we do that is what I wanted to say. When something so terrible does happen, we have to realize that it's important to go back to the basics. And so the most important, I think the strongest advice that I have is about going back to basic needs. So you may have heard this before, and as a parent, you might have had this like in an intro to psych class years ago, but you know, there's the famous pyramid of needs by Maslow, that was the hierarchy of needs that said what we all need in order to feel safe and to be able to be like a well-functioning human, right? And so there are certain things that are at the bottom of this pyramid that have been shaken by the circumstances that we're in. And so that's why we have to go literally back to the very beginning. So if somebody doesn't have their basic needs taken care of, they're not able to move on. They're not able to, in the case of our kids that we're concerned about, they're not going to be capable of learning. And that's their job. That's their full-time job is to be a student. And they have to have intact mental health to be able to do that. And so we want you to focus on, I want you to focus on their basic needs. So right now, it's not that they don't have food and shelter. That's the physical environment is the bottom one. But the one above that is the one that's really been shaken. The safety needs. There's a personal sense of an attack on their safety. I have to say, I think what happens that shakes people the most is when somebody close to your own age passes away. When somebody dies that's your age, it shakes people, and it's something that they can't ever unknow and not think about again, the possibility that this could be something that happens to them. Again, we talk about possibility versus probability though. This is not a common occurrence, right? This is not something that we expect to happen to anybody. It's the rare exception that this happens at this age. So for a young high schooler, we do not expect them to pass away, right? So I think that a big part of the message is that you know, we understand that this is highly unusual. That we tell our kids this is not supposed to happen, and likely never will happen, and will not be happening to you, is the message and the reassurance that I think kids need. This is not what usually happens, right? And so I think you have to point out, just because it was possible and that this did happen, that it is not likely to happen to them. I know it might seem so obvious that these, you know, that a kid doesn't think that they might die, but when somebody who's their own age dies, that will absolutely occur to them, that it could happen to them. You have to just reassure them this is highly, highly unusual. So when this happens, in the context of also what's already happening within the community, there's less of a safety net around. School is the safety net. For kids, you know, and of course family is, you know, where we originate and where we get most of our needs met, but school has always been the safety net for kids. And it's where they have the predictable routine and they have their friends around them and it's their social life. It's their hub, right? But that's where they get their sense of belongingness, right? That's where they have friendships and relationships. But that is also so altered for them. So I think that we need to spend a lot of extra time in creating the opportunities for them to have their sense of belonging and connection to their friends, and reminders that they are safe and that they are okay, to be very, very explicit messages that we give them now. And it might seem obvious, but it doesn't matter how old, you know, even if you have like a kid who seems so mature, and, you know, this big kid who's about to even like go to college, that is still somebody who needs all of this, because even the adults need this. So in order for them to, you know, continue and have their brain available for learning, and them feel safe to be able to not develop an anxiety disorder or depression, they need these basic fundamental levels of the pyramid to be solid. And so we have to go out of our way to create those opportunities. So I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about what some of those things are that we can do. But the other kind of global message I want to give you is that it's important to know what grieving looks like. So our community is grieving on multiple levels. They're grieving the loss of what normal life looked like, what school looked like, what friendships and socializing looked like. And they're grieving a specific loss of a friend and a person in their community, and multiple people in their community. And so what I want parents to know is that this is a completely normal process. Everyone who has lost some important relationship or person or sense of normalcy in their daily life goes through a grieving process. And they're not completely discrete. That's why there's this crazy arrows happening in the middle, because it's not like, ooh, I graduated from starting with denial and I got all the way to acceptance and I didn't skip a beat. And it's not that neat and easy. So these lines in the middle is just to kind of point out that people go in and out of these stages, but it's expected that you will see things like this. So denial is the first stage at the beginning of this process, and acceptance is the end. So denial is where you start on this crazy circle. And so denial and starting to isolate yourself and to kind of start to, you know, deny that this really affected them. Many kids will start saying, oh yeah, I didn't know, or yeah, I wasn't close, or, you know, they might just deny that there is an impact. That's a common reaction, to just kind of put it at bay like that. And it's the beginning that they should move through that phase. Then it's common, very common, for kids to just get angry about the circumstances, you know, the loss of their daily life. They might just get angry and push back against the restrictions that we're giving them. They might get angry that that a person died, even though it's completely untrue that somebody chooses to leave. Somebody who dies feels like they were left behind, the person who is still alive. And so it's common for people to start to get angry about the situation, and even angry at the person who died. So all bets are off. All of those feelings are completely expected and valid. And then there's an expected period of a depression that's expected to happen for people. And at each of these stages that I mentioned so far, the concern is one of the kids or even the adults getting stuck at one of those stages. So this is what's important to know. They're expected to move through this adjustment period, start to finish. I can never, like, I hate saying things from textbooks, but people are expected to move through this in 3 to 6 months. And if you see that this like really fierce, intense anger stage or the depression stage just lingers and it's going on for a long time, they're not moving through it, that's when you want to get help. You know, school professional, outside professionals for mental health, to do an evaluation and make sure that something hasn't started to kind of stick with them that's developing a disorder like depression or anxiety. So expect that this is what it would look like, but we don't want them to get stuck at any one of these parts. After depression, there's kind of people that will go through a phase where they're like, all right, if, kind of bargaining with the world, like if I'm really good, then this won't happen to me, they might think, thinking of somebody who passed away. They might say, well, if I'm a really good kid and I do everything I'm told to do, nothing's going to happen to me, just making a deal with God kind of a thing. So after that, after there's been the movement through these stages, people are expected to get to a point of acceptance. Acceptance of what is happening doesn't mean complacency and you're not going to, follow the rules of COVID social distancing. And it doesn't mean that you're ever forgetting the person that you lost if we're talking about a death with this cycle. It means that I picture it like a thermostat or a dial, and the intensity of the pain of that loss that you were dealing with has been turned down to like a manageable dull roar. And then people are able to, for example, in the case of somebody who passes away, they're able to focus and remember and think about the positive moments, the memories that they had with them. And they're not only thinking of that last period, that last moment that they had with them. That might not have been a very good experience. They might be able to just focus on the love that they had from that person, the friendship that they had, and the positive feelings that they had towards that person, and not have it all be the sadness and the pain of thinking about that person as the only predominant feeling they have. So that's what acceptance looks like. And people go in and out of these phases, like they're bargaining one day and then they're feeling really depressed the next. These things will go on. But again, this is the point. We don't want them to get stuck at any one of these stages. I think I saw, Lena, that there's something in Q&A, but I can't actually read it. I just see a number. So is it?
Sorry, I just, yeah, so one question is, does this look the same for a 4-year-old? My 4-year-old Joel lost his father 3 weeks ago. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
The stages of grief do look the same. However, the understanding of what death is like, or what death is not solid and accurate at 4 years old. So around 8 or 9 years old is when children develop the ability to understand that death is forever. Before that, they're in more cartoon land where a character dies and they resurrect in the next scene, right? They don't kind of get that it's forever or what that even means or where people go. They don't understand the big picture concepts. So their understanding of this is difficult and often delayed because there's, not a thinking process. There's no cognition intact the way it will be when they're older and can process the grief. So they will, kind of have more of a raw version of this, a lot of acting out and behavior issues and regression primarily. Wanting to sleep with you, bedwetting, regressing to, having toileting accidents are highly, highly common and expected. So grief and the behaviors that come out while you're grieving look different based on your age when you're that young. That's the dividing line, when you're under 8 or over 8. So that's why you would see something a little different with him. And I'd be very happy to talk to you personally after if that could be helpful to you.
There's one more. With regard to the 5 stages, doesn't an ongoing situation like COVID complicate this process as opposed to dealing with an event of a death?
Yes. So the original research for the stages of loss and grief was for a discrete event. This was expected to be somebody had the loss and it was over. But the chronic adjustment to the loss of lifestyle and the loss of normalcy in your society, we're retrofitting this grief cycle to explain it. But it does definitely explain that we're going in and out of these stages as each new thing is happening. So, for example, there's an adjustment period going back to school. There's going to be an adjustment period at the end of the school year at different junctures when they have to go from like middle school to high school while they're still dealing with COVID. When they have different transitions in life, they will, and they're still dealing with an ongoing stressor, it will keep the cycle going and even make it reemerge because it's a new adjustment period. So in that case, when something is a chronic stressor and you're seeing somebody stuck because of these circumstances in these stages for a while, like if it's more than 3 months, like we want them to have support. And so I would say definitely have them have an evaluation where they get connected to somebody that they can check in with, because it is an ongoing changing situation. And if they are expressing a lot of these early things like isolating behavior, anger, and depression, those are concerning. And if it's continuing to go on for those number of months, they need support and a counselor. It's somebody they could check in with. And that might be the counselor at school who are uniquely able to kind of know what it's like for them to deal with their school situation. But if there's very personal additional things, it might be a mental health professional outside the school that makes the most sense to talk to. But yes, it's a very good point. Stages of grief can be this ongoing process because it's an ongoing chronic stressor. So, but I have to say, you know, watching kids and their parents from the beginning of COVID till now, this does pan out. There are people that are, okay, this is our new normal. And they're not like, ooh, reacting and ooh, feeling the pain and really distressed and getting stuck in the anger. And then there's the minority of them that worsened and they really do have an anxiety disorder or a depression. And so even though it's an ongoing changing situation, people have kind of gotten through 3 to 6 months now and kind of gotten their handle on COVID and the new life. So if you're still seeing it, I think it's time for an evaluation after this amount of time. So that's a good question. I hope I addressed that enough. And this is the other thing, you know, knowing the signs of when your child might be overwhelmed and you or your child, right? It gets really confusing with symptoms. Sadness, I think we all kind of get, right? Like we kind of know what sadness looks like, but anxiety I find is very confusing because it looks like so many different things that are also physical. And you could just think that your kid gets, you know, lightheaded when they play outside, and you might not even think to ask, I wonder if they're nervous, you know, or I wonder if it's an anxiety symptom. You just think, I don't know, maybe it's just a physical thing that they overdo it, get overheated. Sometimes these physical things can get explained in a medical way, and we don't think of them as signs that they're anxious. So these are the most common ones I just wanted you to have as a reference for the physical manifestations of anxiety. And so if we see, I was trained as a health psychologist to begin with. And so in my training, we spent a lot of time in medical settings with people that were with the same chronic health conditions all the time. It was people who got headaches. With kids, it's headaches and stomach aches. And it's just where the body experiences it, you know? And so when you're hearing a lot of the same, you know, I have a tummy ache, you know, those are, you know, the zebra is, oh, maybe they have a GI problem. The more common explanation is that they're experiencing physical anxiety. And so having an evaluation is something to help them, you know, tease that out. because these become chronic conditions, and even very young kids developing full migraine syndromes, which is highly likely to be somehow contributed by anxiety. And so there's very common physical conditions that come from anxiety. So I didn't want you to, I wanted you to have some examples of it. And I wanted you to also see that I shared in the last presentation too about the signs of what a panic attack looks like. Because it can kind of come out in many different forms. It doesn't have to be all of these symptoms at once. Oh, I meant to change this again. I don't know why the center text is there, because that was just left over from another slide, sorry. But the signs of a panic attack is all here. And again, they're all physical symptoms. So it can get really confusing that, like, you know, your kid is nauseous and it's like, oh, I wonder if that they have, you know, they're coming down with something. You know, you would just automatically think that. But dizziness is a function of breathing, anxious breathing. And so that's a very common one that results in a lot of these things. Altered breathing, that I'm going to talk about as an intervention, is causes a lot of these problems, like feeling trembling and numbness and hyperventilating and feeling dizzy. All happen because, and heart palpitations, all happen because of altered breathing. That is what I call anxious breathing. So I'm just going to leave this here to let you know that I really want everyone to go back to focusing on how we can set the stage with our kids about how important it is to focus on self-regulation by doing it together. And so that's called co-regulation, while, you know, side by side, you're working on how to regulate your emotions. And that starts with being able to help them regulate so that you can get to the higher level things. When you're talking to somebody who is grieving, you are talking to somebody whose brain is hijacked by emotion in the moment, right? They're upset, and it's very hard to reach somebody who's upset. And it doesn't really help to say, why are you upset? Why are you upset? It really doesn't help, but helping their body feel better and regain their own control of how they feel is a way to build connection with them and their own ability to feel like they have some control over what's happening to them, and then feel connection to others, and then can actually talk about what's happening. So we all have the experience of talking to kids, and we ask them how they feel and they say, fine, right? Like, we don't get much of an answer. And a lot of it is that we're asking an unknowable question, because sometimes they can't access how they're feeling or be able to explain it because they're hijacked. You know, when you're anxious and upset and stressed, you can't even gather your thoughts well enough to explain it to somebody else, much less even understand it yourself. So the emphasis, I think, right now, as we just don't know what to do for others, you know, when we see that people in our community are struggling and we don't know how to make people feel better, we don't know the right things to say, I think the important thing to do with our kids is to help them feel that they can control how their body feels. And the regulation part that I bring up all the time is to focus on their breath. And it's the most empowering feeling. And so I put the recommendations about how to do this with your kids, and to do it side by side, and to use apps to kind of guide you through it together. It's a really centering thing, and allows you and them to get their brain back, to be able to focus, to be able to learn again and focus on what they have to do, which is put one foot in front of the other and get back into school and their regular routine. And it's incredibly hard, but will be very reinforcing and helping them get better and not stuck in the stages that could become depression and anxiety. If we can help them feel better in their body and back to the activities that their regular activities were. So I know that sounds a little crazy, because nothing is as it was. But the closest thing that we could approximate to what life was like giving them time for their version of socialization now. And I'm going to point out some things that you can do with them side by side as well. But the first thing I'd want you to always try to do with them is to help them regain their composure. And that is achieved by doing breathing. You can reverse a lot of what they've been feeling and expel the negative things that they're experiencing in their body by helping them do this. It's the most concrete thing that I could tell you that absolutely has the most bang for the buck. And in the immediate, literally 1 to 2 minutes period of time. So focusing on that, if you haven't ever tried that with them, I think is really helpful. And the thing that I wanted to say about doing things side by side with the kids is that I think that it would really be reassuring to have the regular establishment and continuation of routines. And I add traditions to this too, because I think it's important to add that you are doing something maybe that you haven't even done before. So maybe you're starting to have game nights. Maybe you're starting to do walks together as a family. That helps to expel the stress and the anxiety as well as build connection. And the way out of the pain that people are experiencing is through connection. And so all these activities are meant on purpose to build connection and regular, predictable, which is what you need to prevent anxiety, regular, predictable opportunities for connection. That's the way out of grief, and that is the way through the changes and the adjustments that everybody's being asked to make because of COVID. A big part of what we can also do is always use positive messaging. I bring this up because when I do breathing with people, because I'm a biofeedback practitioner, so I teach people how to do breathing. And the one thing that I ask them to do is to focus on positive emotions while they do it. And so it helps that we remind them to do things like that, to focus on a positive memory, to give them reassurances and kind of positive messaging is a way that we can kind of help be role models for this. And a centering kind of concrete thing that you can do with kids, no matter what age, I'm definitely talking, even for adults, so I'm talking about every age, is trying to help focus them on doing mindfulness kinds of exercises. When they focus on a positive thing, a positive feeling, something they feel joy about, something that they positively look back on, like a favorite vacation they had. Do you ever notice in Facebook that they have these memories that you can share? Like this day 10 years ago, and that what you posted that day? I made this commitment, a COVID commitment to myself, that I was going to keep sharing all those positive memories, because all we keep thinking about is like, we can't go anywhere. We can't do anything together anymore. We're not seeing our friends. And so every time, even though some of them I don't even want to post, even though every time they come up, I'm like, oh yeah, I used to be able to travel. I used to go places. This was like this great family dinner we had. And I share it because I'm like, I got nothing to share now because nothing's going on. So I'm doing it. And it changes your mindset. This is really all about like changing mindset and thinking what is the positive stuff we can reflect on. Because it really sets the tone for you feeling better. And it's used in conjunction with the breathing. So you ask someone to think about a positive memory. It could be their puppy. It could be, if you're an adult, it could be like the day your baby was born. Some really positive experience. A time when you actually felt like really grateful for what you had, or a joyful moment that you had. And when you focus on that and you do the breathing literally for 2 minutes, it changes things. I cannot possibly like explain or encourage it enough. And I always feel like people will think it's like frou-frou and not scientific and, oh, that can't possibly help. And I'm like, no, it's like, it's the most rewarding thing to date I still have ever done with any client, because I always get to see that they feel so much better And I don't often get to see that kind of reward. You know, it's like, I don't know, it's a job where I talk to people who are in distress a lot, right? So people aren't so happy. But to see them like change, because I show them on a computer screen what their stress levels are, their heart rate and everything. And they're like, oh my God, I did that? Like, and they see their body feels better. So there's not much that is ever as rewarding as being able to control your own body. And what I first ever said about focus on what you can control, being able to realize that you can control how your body feels, and then notice that your brain comes back online in a really efficient way once you do that, it's so rewarding. It's clearly like the best thing I ever get to do. So wanted to point that out. And then a couple last things is the kind of messaging that we can use with kids and for ourselves is to think about certain analogies about how to like kind of go with the flow of the ups and the downs and the pain and the stresses of what's been happening to us. This analogy of riding the wave comes from this thing that we tell people in therapy all the time. This little snippet is that we tell people, think about someone who is kind of pulled out by the current and they're bobbing around in the water in the ocean. The person who does not make it is actually the person who's fighting the wave and is like, they exhaust themselves and they can't rise to the surface and swim back to shore. The person who's able to ride the wave and go with that flow and let the waves kind of let them bob up and down until they are like brought back naturally with the next wave to the shore, they're the ones who survive fine. They're the ones that don't get exhausted physically and mentally, right? If they can experience their emotion without being completely knocked down and dragged under the current by it, when they learn to surf that wave, that's when people start to feel better. So I try to teach kids and adults also about being able to kind of go with how hard things feel right now and know that when you don't fight against it, which means resist thinking about it and trying not to not work on it, really, that's how they feel better, is if they actually allow themselves to go through the process and not just ignore that it's happening, like that denial we talked about at the beginning of the grief cycle. That's why we can't stay there. And then that's the whole point. You know, you can stop the waves, but you can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf them. So that's kind of the final message that I think is helpful. And I like printing these things out and you put it in your teenager's room, or, you know, you kind of stick it on the refrigerator for like family central station, kids who pass by it to see. It's like a very good orienting message and a reminder for people. I think it's helpful. And then the last thing is just, we talked about the signs of like when people get stuck, and knowing that grieving is an absolutely normal process. We are not robots. We are humans with emotions and experience that we are going to feel all of these emotions. But if we get stuck and we find that we are in too much distress for us to tolerate, and they get to decide that. If any one of your kids says, I don't care about the grief cycle, it's been 2 days and I can't bear how I feel, that's enough. Then you're ready to go to a professional then. You don't have to wait, you know? If someone is in a lot of distress and recognizing, you know, what's normal grieving versus they're in feeling an intolerable amount of distress and for too long, that's when you know to enlist professionals. And they can help by doing all these kinds of different things. We don't realize this, but doing an evaluation can be really helpful, just like one-time consult kind of thing. And there are specific therapies for trauma and for anxiety and for depression. So I didn't spell out what EMDR is, but that's the specific trauma therapy that people do, that therapists do, and you can bring your child to. There's a specific cognitive behavioral therapy built just for kids that are 8 years old and up called The Coping Cat. It's this cute little character that really just helps kids understand how to work with their anxious thoughts. So there's all these different things. And when your kid is young and maybe too young to participate, they have play therapy. So kids that are under 8 years old go to play therapy. And there's parent coaching sessions where your kid might not be a therapy candidate, might not be that kind of kid, might not be, an age where they're accepting even of it. But the parent goes, and the parent gets the advice and the guidance and knows how to then guide the kid at home. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that you bring your kid to therapy. And they can teach specific things that, when people are grieving, when people are dealing with lots of adjustments and change, they start to have hallmark symptoms like sleep problems. And you can get like short-term advice about how to handle specific problems that come up like that. And so I just want to point out that the majority, I know from my coworkers, the majority of us are still doing teletherapy over video. Those services still are working. They should be accessed. It's been, I can tell you, very effective. Even if you don't feel like it's something that your kid might be capable of doing. I don't think any of us would have thought our kids were capable of going to school on Zoom either. So, they're getting their entire education this way and their socialization. And it's not so far off the cuff to think that they could be okay with doing virtual therapy too. And they're good about it, especially when you have kids that they're bored chronically and they have difficulty engaging. Lots of child therapists are good about engaging and doing online things with sharing screens and kind of therapy exercises and games together that they would have done in the office, but they're just doing it virtually. So it's just something for you to think about. And I wanted you to have my contact information. So that's that slide. And then just so you know, there is a very extremely thorough list of resources that are added in additionally from last time. And Weston Youth Services, I really, really thank, because I had these resources that were about the COVID-related kind of adjustments and what parents could use as resources. This is treatment resources, places that are local, that if you wanted to consider having an evaluation for your child, these are places that are the go-to places that are well vetted. And I did not have grief and loss resources that were specific to what's been going on in the community. And so now, thanks to Weston Youth Services, we have these, and these are great links broken down by category. So I wanted you to have this and keep this because we're going to have these guided conversations with our kids about the trauma that's been going on. And we need some guidance about how to do that. And so these are some great resources for you to check out. All right, Lena, you did not interrupt me that much.
I know, I've been awfully quiet. No, no, there hasn't been any questions. I think everybody's probably digesting all the information, but thank you, Mary. That was super helpful. If anybody have any more questions, we'll keep it open for a little bit. Type it into the Q&A, and can always feel free to contact Dr. Murphy through her slides if you have specific questions that you don't want to put in an open forum.
I'm going to put my slide with my email back up. Everybody will have the slides, right, when it gets posted on SpedNet?
Yeah, it'll be up on the website.
Oh, actually, after I give it to you.
Yeah, yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah. So.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. You're always so helpful, especially the continuous reminder that, as parents, we sometimes forget that how we're feeling can be projected, and it's very easy to kind of get caught up in a lot of the COVID, worries, and especially with politics right now. And our kids can definitely sense how we're feeling and how we're coping, whether they're young or old, and it definitely impacts them in different ways. I've got young and old in my house, and I always have to be mindful of how I'm talking myself through these things so that I can also help my kids work through it positively. You know, it's easy to go negative, and that's a good reminder for all of us, and especially your help and insight on managing grief today has been particularly helpful. It's a lot of the same tools that we already have. We just don't know that they can apply to that emotion as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. I was thinking about how, you know, grief is something that we have not really, you know, Kubler-Ross, like, you know, came out with the stages of grief and loss and death and dying back in like the 80s. And it's, I haven't seen people really start to apply that to the loss of lifestyle too, you know? But I think that's definitely what people are grieving, like the loss of normalcy, you know? And it started with what the kids were saying, like, my whole life has been canceled, from proms to, somebody was just joking about how it's picture day in their school district today. And they're like, what are they gonna just like pick stitch together the two cohorts because they can't be in the same room together? Like, how do you do a class picture even, you know? Like, everything is reinvented and constantly having to be reinvented. And so we're dealing with a lot all at once.
Yeah, my freshman, she's super social, and she came home and she's like, Mom, I just want to go remote. And I said, what? It's not, you know, and she's like, well, I can't talk to anybody. I don't see anybody. I'm not allowed to socialize. I can't talk to people in the hallway. She's like, at least on Zoom, I all see their faces.
Right.
You know, so it is a stage of grief for them.
Yeah.
With school.
Yeah. And there's always like the feeling of like, when is the other shoe going to drop? You know, because every day, is there going to be another case that puts us past the 14-day rolling average that makes it so that we have to go home? And, you know, there's always like, what's going to happen next? And it puts us in this hypervigilant state. And that is prime category, you know, for becoming an anxious, you know, an anxiety disorder, to always be looking over your shoulder in this hypervigilant way. And it's exhausting. Just imagine the physical health implications of being in a chronic state of stress for this amount of time, you know?
Yeah. So I'm not, excuse me, I'm not seeing anymore. So I see people are kind of dropping off here. So I think we'll just close it down and say thank you so much. And I'm
Thank
sure
you,
we'll
Mary.
see you soon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.